it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. And then in the corporate setting, it's about what's said whenever you're not in the room. And in that, if you're trying to play that game, you're trying to get everyone in that room to say good things about you. And it's not just, oh, they do good work. It's, I like them. I like hanging out with them, etc. And they have a certain way that they think the client wants their counterpart to look like. And so, yeah, I think after that, it really opened my eyes to what kind of experiences, where do I want to spend my time and energy, and for the most part, to be away from corporate America.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Unmuted Moments, a podcast exploring the journey to finding and owning your voice. I'm your host, Ehis, and today I am excited to be joined by Jesús Salas. He's based in California and is a venture capital investor where he partners with US-based founders pushing forward the boundaries of economic inclusion. He grew up in Texas, studied at Stanford for his undergrad, and at Columbia for his MBA. He also has international experiences in Nicaragua and Kenya before going to business school. So today we will discuss how he found his voice at different chapters of his life, including growing up, his international experiences, business school, and at his current career in venture capital. So Jesus, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, good to be here.
So I usually start the show just asking about your background. So can you tell us a little bit about your background growing up and how that shaped your voice?
Happy to share. So I was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, a town right next to Dallas. And my parents immigrated there from Mexico 40 plus years ago and eventually settled there after working and living in different other states and looking for work, picking oranges in Florida, working on ranches in Oklahoma, and then eventually found some stability in Fort Worth. So that's where I was born and raised, in a predominantly Mexican community on the north side of Fort Worth. And that's where I grew up. Spoke Spanish as my first language in the household. And then for middle and high school, ended up going to what was back then called a magnet school, or I think it's called a special interest program now, school where you get to go to a different part of the city and I rode the bus. But I did that because it was a school well known for math and science. My brother had gone to the high school there, and I chose to go there for middle school, partly because my parents made me, because my brother turned out pretty well. He went to college, and so they said, hey, that's the playbook, so go there for middle school. It's on the east side of Fort Worth, predominantly in an African-American community. And that's where I went to middle school and high school. And then eventually, through a lot of programs, primarily one being Upward Bound, was able to be exposed to different options in terms of colleges, universities, and that eventually led me to being able to apply and then get into Stanford, coupled with a bunch of very fortunate scholarships. And then that's whenever I went to college. But that's a bit of a nutshell of my upbringing.
So you said you went to middle school and high school in a town with predominantly African-American population. So how was that for you every day when you got on that bus? So your community growing up was mostly Mexican-American or Mexican, is that right? So how was that for you, that experience, blending those two cultures between home and then school?
Yeah, I mean, the experience for me, I think I didn't really comprehend the experience as I was going through it. I think it's much more as I'm older and able to look back on it now. But I think it gave me the ability to see things from different perspectives and to be a bit more open-minded. Whenever someone has a stereotype in their head, it's typically because it's the easy thing to think about, and that's what the media has purported. And so you tend to think of things in a certain one dimension, and being able to be in community that's different from mine, where frankly I am an intruder in some senses, you're forced to be a little bit more. I guess there's two routes you can take. One is just being abrasive and confrontational, and I saw some people that were that way, and another one is just to be more open, and I think I took the latter approach. And so having friends, some of my best friends back then are African American, and just even the small things, learning about Juneteenth, which in my community growing up, it wasn't a holiday that you knew about. Like, my parents understand English, but to explaining to them Juneteenth is a big thing. But yeah, I think that ability to navigate different spaces has helped me in navigating different other types of spaces, more elite spaces at Stanford and Columbia that weren't necessarily built by people like me in terms of corporate America and such. And I think that was the first experience of being able to navigate those spaces.
You mentioned a couple of key points there. I think one that I like was the idea of like stereotypes is often like the easy route. Is the predominant belief, whether it's media or culture, and it's the easy route. And the truth is, any culture or any town, place, right, there's always, no matter how good it is, there's always some bad things about it. But no matter how bad it is, there's also some good things about it, right? I just think about like I grew up in Nigeria, just from an African perspective, where if you're watching TV in America, you see all those like little kids in maybe the Congo or those war-ravaged countries, like, oh, donate $10, donate whatever. And sometimes it gets to me, I'm like, this is obviously not the full picture. Some of that is true. It's not totally untrue that they're not like war-ravaged towns or communities. But if that's the only thing that you saw about Africa, then you might just think that's all there is. So I do like your point about that exposure, exposing yourself to other cultures. That's when you see those other layers. That's when you see that second side of it, the third side, or however many sort of variances. And there is to that, whether it's a culture, a town, or a community. You also mentioned the whole idea of how you could be abrasive when you go to a new community or a new culture, or you could be open-minded. You said you chose to be open-minded. So was that something your parents instilled in you, or where did you sort of get that perspective at that stage in life to choose that route?
Yeah, I think for me, looking back at it, the confrontational route. So I guess growing up, I didn't have a lot of examples. And again, maybe this is psychoanalyzing, but growing up in the communities that we grew up in, I didn't see a lot of examples of being confrontational. And I think now looking back at it as an adult, sort of the immigrant trope is just you kind of put your head down and work hard and what you're known for. And you don't try to cause a lot of attention. You don't try to ruffle people's feathers. So I think maybe subconsciously that's the way that I was raised, to just more or less like follow the rules, mind your business. And I think that carried over into, I remember like in middle school or high school, there's like the Mexicans versus the blacks, like literally people fighting over what, who knows. And for me, like to me, just observing the different paths of like, it just didn't make sense. It didn't equate for me to want to be thinking that your way of doing something is better, that I think it was never really an option for me. And so the default option became, hey, let me observe, let me understand, and then eventually try to ask questions and be more respectful. I was raised with respect to be front and foremost. Growing up culturally Catholic, you follow respect, especially for your elders. In this community, they weren't my elders per se, but it was something new. And so respect was what I defaulted to. So yeah, being confrontation from a decision tree, like that ended up not in positive places. And so the other route was what I thought made the most sense.
It's awesome. Obviously, it's done well for you. And you mentioned in your answer just now about, part of the immigrant experience sometimes just like putting your head down and following the rules and then hoping that things will work out. And I guess it does for a amount of time. It does work out. But I think the other side of it too is sometimes you do put your head down, you do work hard, and sometimes you don't get what you deserve by doing that, right? You work hard, you go to school, get good grades, graduate with distinction, and then get a job. And then you still keep that mindset of, I'm not going to ruffle any feathers. I'm just going to work hard, put my head down, and my work would speak for me. And I think part of actually why I created this show, this podcast, was to explore that topic. At least for me, I've had a situation early in my career where I did take that approach of not like speaking up or advocating for myself at all, just waiting that my work was going to speak for itself. And then I was passed up for promotions, and people who I thought I worked harder than they did got promoted, right? So I think that's the other extreme too. So how have you seen that's been in a situation where you're like, hey, this approach like doesn't work for me anymore. Like I have to like start on this journey of self-advocacy or like speaking up more, not just thinking or believing that my work itself will speak for me.
Yeah. I too had a very similar experience to you where I was passed up on promotion, even though, and you can look at my LinkedIn to see those corporate experiences that I had, but it was my first full-time corporate experience and had gotten the highest ratings that you can get on the projects. But like even instilled in the rating system, like even though you can get high ratings on projects, that still doesn't mean that you can get the highest rating internally. And then thinking back at it, that just means that it's not just the work that you do that you get paid for by clients, and this is in the consulting world, it's everything else you're doing to contribute to the firm. A lot of that is social cachet, it's social equity. And that depends on the people that you're surrounding yourself with. Are you going to those events? Are you making the right connections? And no one ever told me those things and how important those were. And so I think that was probably the exact similar experience to you. And as I've grown older, now heard numerous other folks that have had similar experiences. And I think that was really where it opened my eyes to some of the cliche things. It's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. And then in the corporate setting, it's about what's said whenever you're not in the room. If you're trying to play that game, you're trying to get everyone in that room to say good things about you. And it's not just, oh, they do good work. It's, I like them. I like hanging out with them, etc.
Yeah, can I have a conversation with them? And I think they can represent us well in front of a client too.
And yeah, and they have a certain way that they think the client wants to look like. And so after that, it really opened my eyes to what kind of experiences, where do I want to spend my time and energy? And for the most part, took me away from corporate America. And that has more or less served me well in terms of you can go a route where you're trying to become an intrapreneur and change things from the inside, which is very admirable. A lot of folks doing that, but their systems have been entrenched for decades, if not hundreds of years. Or you can go the other route, which is the entrepreneurship innovation route, which has been the backdrop of my career and ultimately led to where I am today.
I think a lot of the listeners of this show are going to be in that sort of young professional bucket who maybe are out of college a few years now or trying to get that first promotion. So to you listeners listening, this is a key lesson. We don't want you to make that same mistake. I think it serves you well, especially in college, to put your head down, right? You do well in your tests and your quizzes and your exams, you get good grades, and that speaks for itself. You graduate with a distinction or whatever, cum laude, or whatever you get. That works well there. But once you get into the corporate world, it's another ball game, another set of rules that you're playing. I'm hoping that you don't have to learn this way and you start earlier than we did in terms of thinking about who are those decision makers beyond just doing my day-to-day job and doing it well or getting a good rating like you did. You got a good rating in those individual projects, but when it comes to the overall rating, it wasn't still as favorable. To start thinking about what are those extra things, what are those other things that I need to start doing, and what are those connections, who those people do I need to know, who can start advocating for me in those rooms that I might not be in. So that's the goal here. I hope in some of these conversations that people would learn, get some tips and some framework to start knowing how to have these conversations. Essentially just believe that you can advocate for yourself. And it's fine. It's totally fine. I think the immigrant mindset, sometimes it feels negative or it feels like you're doing too much. If you like veer off just doing your work, like trying to schmooze and trying to get like social cachet, sometimes, at least for me, it felt like that's like doing too much. What? In corporate America, in corporate world, it's kind of expected. That's like part of your job. That's part of your work, especially if you work in a big firm or a professional services firm. So yeah, I really hope for those young listeners out there that you start thinking about this and start thinking about like, how can I bring my head up from just putting my head down, doing the work? How can I bring my head up? Who do I need to know? If I don't feel comfortable doing it, what are those resources that I can use? Whether it's, books, mentors within your company, outside of your company, they can sort of help you in this path. So that's just an important call out that I wanted to make here. So let's keep going in your story. So we've talked about growing up, middle school, high school, and then you went to Stanford for undergrad. So how was that experience being in an elite place like Stanford and coming from your humble background? Like, did you feel like you had to change how you expressed yourself, change your voice, or change anything about you to fit in? How was that journey for you?
It was a rough one to begin with from a culture shock perspective. To be completely honest with you, I didn't know someone, I wasn't friends with a white person before going to Stanford. Not because I was against that individual, I just wasn't exposed to them. The few white folks that went to the middle school or high school that I went to, they weren't in the classes that I was in. I wasn't exposed to interacting with them. And again, I grew up in a community that's predominantly Mexican. And so my freshman year roommate is white, played water polo. I had no idea what water polo was when I got to Stanford, and comes from a very different socioeconomic class than I did. And we became friends. I was at his wedding. and we still keep in touch. I've known his family for many years. So all that to say, the initial few years were rough from a socioeconomic. I grew up in Texas, very much exposed to that culture and the Mexican culture whenever we would visit my extended family in Mexico. So California was completely new to me, but I knew that it was overall going to be positive for me in terms of a new experience. But again, it was rough academically. It was very challenging. I went to a public elementary, middle school, and high school that was severely underfunded. A lot of the great teachers that were there whenever my brother was there. My brother ended up going to Rice University as an engineer, partly because the school was one of the best schools in Fort Worth. But a lot of the good teachers had been leaving because lack of resources, lack of attention. And when I got there, it was on the brink of being, I don't know what the right word is, but taken over by the state, where the staff is completely taken over and it's complete staff turnover because of the poor performance. So that's the situation I found myself in, and being able to, the homesickness coupled with the culture shock, coupled with the academics, made for a pretty difficult time. But thankfully, I was able to find communities where I had some support, the biggest one being a Latino interest fraternity called Gamma Zeta Alpha, which is what I eventually joined and then became a part of, and I'm still a member of. But yeah, finding that family away from home was really important. But yeah, the short answer was it was a journey.
Community is always important in these types of journeys. I remember as international students in college, I've never used a laundry machine for my laundry before. And I remember I couldn't use the washing machine. So I had to, and it's funny because the person I asked was also an international student, but things like that, basic things like a washing machine, I couldn't use. But eventually, I think, as you mentioned, like finding a community of people who go through the same thing, that you're not ashamed to tell them, hey, like, I don't know how to use this thing, or don't know how to do this thing. And you feel comfortable like sharing, and you don't feel like, hey, if I say to this person, I don't know how to use a washing machine, they might look negatively on me and say, like, what kind of, where did you come from? You know what I mean? So I found it very important to have those kind of communities to be able to ask those type of questions that you might not otherwise be comfortable asking other people. So you mentioned this group. Were there any other resources in college that was helpful for you in succeeding and achieving whatever goals that you had for yourself? Besides, was there any other resources for any listeners that might be listening who are in undergrad who might be in a similar situation?
I mean, I would hope that there's a ton more resources now. Looking back at it, I'm sure they were around. I think culturally we weren't where we are now from a mental health resources standpoint, but I have to imagine that there was a lot of resources in that regard. I didn't take advantage of them, but I wish I did. And again, part of that was just I didn't know those existed. I didn't grow up in a community where mental health was a topic. And so I think in 2025, we're in a much different space than 2008, whenever I was a freshman. So I would say turn to those types of resources. Outside of resources, to try to answer your question, I would say that an experience that really helped me was studying abroad. And again, it wasn't necessarily a resource, but this was another way for me to challenge myself in a different form than I had before. I studied abroad in Chile, which was an easier option language-wise, but geographically and culturally very different from what I knew, from what I was exposed to. And this was yet another experience where, like for me, being Hispanic, Latino was being Mexican. I wasn't exposed much to Colombians, to like other folks who speak Spanish. And so being able to go to the southernmost point of the Americas and learn about their history, politically, socioeconomically, and travel, that was really where the travel bug started and then hasn't stopped ever since. But I would say and encourage folks to seek those types of experiences where, I mean, looking back at it, I think someone suggested that I do it and I did it, and I was so glad that I did it. So that's one thing that I would say in terms of, again, not a resource, but an experience that really shaped me.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's a great one for people who may have that type of opportunities in their colleges or campuses. Even for me as an international student myself, doing that too helped me. I did a small trip to Singapore and Malaysia, and I think it's always a great experience learning about a different culture, exposing yourself. And sometimes, I guess for me, the lesson is you learn about the things that you may not be comfortable, again, like asking about. But when you go to a new culture where you have to ask about little basic things, I think you get very comfortable doing that type of thing. I think in life in general, it's a skill to be comfortable, like asking questions when you meet new people, to be comfortable meeting new people, trying to find some type of connection, asking them questions. And I think in this whole journey about finding your voice, it's something that's very important. If you never open your mouth to ask a question, you might miss an opportunity. You might miss a learning opportunity. You might miss a chance to talk to that person who may give you that promotion. I think in a study abroad context, you get that chance to, right, to do it over and over again, to meet new people over and over again, to ask them questions about. It's fine to say, oh, I'm not from here. Like, where do I go for this thing? Or where do I go for that thing? Like, teach me about this thing. Teach me about that thing. I think those are all life lessons that can benefit all of us. So moving on from Stanford or from undergrad, now you also had additional international experiences, right? I mentioned at the top you went to Kenya, right? You did some work there. So I guess how was that experience for you in terms of gaining confidence in yourself and your abilities and also finding your voice?
Yeah. After an initial stint in corporate America, I went to work for a nonprofit impact investor, initially out of Nicaragua for a year. And then I spent 6 months in Kenya doing similar work. So supporting primarily microfinance and agriculture organizations with loan products. We would invest $500K up to $2 million in these organizations. And on the question about Kenya, I mean, that was the first experience where I was truly a foreigner. In Chile, I mentioned that I lived there, and even in Nicaragua, I was a foreigner technically, but I looked not too dissimilar from the rest of the population. And so I was able to fit in. Whenever I opened my mouth and I spoke Spanish, they would know that I wasn't because I didn't speak like the locals. But in Kenya, I very much was a foreigner. And so it was an experience that I hold very fondly of. Because again, I was never in an environment where I was a foreigner. And so I think there are experiences where you get treated differently because you're a foreigner in certain scenarios. And I think that you can use that to your advantage or be nefarious with it, or you can try to actually be humble. And so I was able to make a lot of, well, relative to the time that I was there, some good friends, traveled to different parts of the country, in the region, and really tried to, again, to the extent that I could, get a sense for the region, for the people, for the music, et cetera, as opposed to just trying to extract for my own benefit. And so really think fondly of my time there. I want to go back at some point, but it is quite far, relatively speaking. But I had such a good time there. I was able to travel to Uganda a couple of times. My coworkers were from Kenya and Uganda. And so was able to get a bit of a more local experience because of that exposure. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, actually, I went to Kenya in January. This is January 2025. A close friend from college who just got married. It was actually my first time there. But I only had a weekend, so I have to do it again. I have to go back like for a proper trip. We got there Friday night and left on Monday. So we were just like in and out. So I don't think that counts.
You got to go
I
back.
think I need to do a proper trip. But I had a great time those couple of days that I were there. You mentioned you went there for impact investing as part of a company you work for. So what drew you to this line of work, impact investing or venture capital?
Yeah. So whenever the way that I thought about my career early on is trying to get exposure and different skill sets. So I had the consulting experience, and then I wanted a new experience where I was going to be able to learn a new skill set. And that's what led me to the organization, because I was going to be able to learn much more about finance. So the nonprofit that I was working with, I was on the investment team supporting portfolio directors that manage one or multiple countries. And they had a book of business, if you will, in terms of supporting the local organization and determining if we were going to invest in them or not. So I was supporting all of those individuals. And for me, the ability to learn about finance through that experience was a very fortunate one, in that the way that I interpreted it is using finance as a tool instead of how I think the majority of society thinks about it. It's an end in and of itself. It's about the accumulation of as much resources as you have, regardless of how you get there and who is impacted positively or negatively. And so the fact that I was able to use the capital that the organization was investing, and then actually firsthand, we would have due diligence trips, which is whenever you're trying to research as much as possible to ultimately make your own judgment of, is this an organization that I think will be good stewards of these resources, of this loan, to do the work that they're doing. So I would go to sometimes remote areas. I was able to go to Peru, Honduras, Mexico, Kenya, Uganda, and again, talk to the small business owner who's taken out a micro loan from a savings cooperative to finance their taxi business or something of that nature. And so the actual experience or the actual usage of those resources was very, or I was able to go to the coffee farms, which were being provided the loans that we were giving them. So all to say that those experiences really drove me about thinking of finance and capital as a tool and as a means, as opposed to just trying to accumulate it for
Not to get rich and get wealthy. I thought that was the point of finance. No?
it has been, and I think it will continue to be for a long time. But for me, it was there was being exposed to there's other ways to do things. It doesn't have to be the only way. And I think having grown up again in an immigrant community and in household where you had to be an entrepreneur because you didn't have a social safety net, we didn't take advantage of food stamps and things of that nature. Partly because we didn't speak the language. So how can you apply if you can't fill out the application form? And so you had to turn to what you knew, which is your community. We had informal savings group called Taras growing up. They still exist today, which is what I saw in Kenya and other parts of Latin America. So for me, the fact that there was another avenue was really interesting. And then to answer your question on terms of venture capital, the work that I was doing exposed me to one product of finance, which is debt or loans. But I had been exposed to the world of startups, partly because of my time at Stanford. I tried to do something on my own, took some time off from school, didn't go anywhere, but I failed fast and early. And then I interned for a startup when I was studying abroad in Chile in the microfinance space. And so those kind of breadcrumbs ultimately led to, hey, finance, capital plus startups, where is that overlap? And it was doing work in venture capital and the earlier stages. And again, as a means to an end, as opposed to just the end in of itself.
Amazing. It's amazing how you sort of connected those dots between, say, like, the work you did in Kenya, all different parallels across the different places you lived in. I think one lesson from hearing you think about your experience here is there's more than one way to do something, right? In finance, people think about finance. Usually you think about investment banking. But for any listeners who are still in college, there are always multiple ways. Even if you're interested in finance, you want to do finance, and you don't get that job or get that internship at your dream, name the bank or name the firm, there are other ways, whether it's impact investing, there are multiple layers. I think that probably goes for consulting or goes for any career paths that you choose, to not just go to the most traditional. It's good to start there. Sometimes it's very helpful to start there, get those experiences, and then you can apply those experiences in other ways. But don't let that dissuade you or stop you when you're trying to pursue that traditional path, whether it's finance and doing banking, and banking doesn't go well and you get discouraged. There's other parts that you can pursue, but oftentimes, like your journey, right? Oftentimes they require a lot of work, and it's usually not straightforward. I mentioned at the top, you went to Columbia for business school, and one of the questions I often get on some social media relates to like business school. What's the point? What are some of the value of business school? I'm just curious from your perspective. Obviously, you had a rich experience already before business school. Like, how did that impact your voice and impact the confidence that you have in yourself?
Yeah, I too get questions about business school and the value or the merit of it. And I can talk someone into business school and I can talk someone out of business school. It is investment, time, energy, finances, etc.
Yeah.
Not just for you, but sometimes your loved ones as well. And so the way that I thought about it, it was an investment in myself and the experience. You probably have heard this or even said this. The way that I think about it is like there's three things that you're going to really focus on in business school. One is career, one is social, and one is academics. And you have to choose two. You can't do all three. So for me, I chose career and then academics. On the career front, I wrote about, and the goal was always going into this early stage, using finance as a tool for hopefully sort of positive experience. And so I joined the student-run impact investing fund, which is the first student-run impact investing fund in the country. I became co-president. I was on the board for many years. And so that really shaped my experience. And in terms of how business school shaped me, I also wanted a graduate degree as an example, for my future generations, whether that be my nieces or nephews. I don't have children right now. My wife and I don't have kids, but if we were to have that as an aspiration component that of the value of education. And then lastly, I think what I didn't really expect but got from it was a confidence boosting experience, more so because it really helped me see that a lot of folks that were there, to one of your earlier points, I was smarter than them and they were doing things or wanted to do things that I had already done. And so it was in many ways humbling, but also confidence boosting that I deserved a spot. I was worthy, in some cases even more worthy than some of those individuals. And it was really an ability for me to add my fingerprint on the experience of what it means to be getting an MBA, in this case at Columbia. So for all those reasons, really helped me be more comfortable speaking up in an environment where I am not the majority, which is, especially in corporate America, the norm. And in that regard, I had a lot of benefit from the experience.
Awesome. I think that it's similar to my experience. Again, as you mentioned, right, we can go both sides of this. I think I tell people, like, if you wanted to say, I want to go to business school because I want to get an investment banking job or I want to get a consultant job, I tell people, like, you probably can find other ways around getting to that job. That's like solely what you want to get to. But for me, a lot of the value I got from it was those like softer things that are kind of hard to place. It's not like, oh, I did it, so I got this particular job or got this bump in my pay. It's again, like for me, yes, it was also a confidence booster for me as well. Before I went to business school, I didn't do investment banking, for example. And obviously in business school, you have a lot of investment bankers, you have consultants, you have people from all kinds of industries that you may look very highly upon before. And so, yeah, we all had classmates who come from all kinds of industries and places and from different family background. And some people in the military, some people grew up in 5 countries or however many sort of experiences that they had. I think, yeah, you do learn that, hey, yes, I deserve to be here. I deserve to be here. I'm not any less deserving than they do. I think for me, that was also my sort of biggest takeaway from the whole business school experience. And I think that's probably one of the things that made me as confident today, even like doing something like this. Sometimes too, I wonder if it's about age. Sometimes I wonder. I always credit business school a lot in my own journey, like in terms of growing up, being comfortable in myself and my voice. But sometimes I also wonder, is part of this story is just like age? The older you get, the more comfortable you just get in yourself and your voice. So I don't know the answer to that question. But I definitely think if that's something that you're hoping to learn or something you're hoping to improve upon, I think business school gives you room to experiment, to explore, right? You know, you could lead as many organizations as you want. If you want to learn about tech, you can learn. You do have a lot of opportunities to experiment with different things. If you want to be very vocal in class, especially when you do cases, so you don't want to be. So for me, I think that was the sort of the biggest benefit, having that sort of room or that ground to experiment different ways, whether with my voice, my confidence, what I wanted to do, what kind of people I want to hang out with, what kind of trips I want to take. So for all of that reason, for me personally, it was worth it. But to listeners out there, if you want to have any like in-depth conversation, you can reach out to any of us individually. I'm sure we'll be happy to go over some of the pros and cons, especially in your particular context.
I don't think it's, from my 2 cents, I don't think it's just age, because I think there are a lot of adults who have a similar mindset and mentality that they did whenever they were teenagers. And that's not a knock on them, but I think it says something different whenever you have that growth mentality where you want to seek new experiences, where you want to seek new challenges. I've now come to realize that the way that I think about those things isn't the way that a lot of other folks. That's not bad. That's just different. And you chose to put yourself in those environments and study for the GMAT and do X, Y, and Z and spend all that money for the prep and et cetera. Not everyone's willing to do that. It takes more work, and that's a different path.
Thank you for validating my story or my journey here about the benefits of business school. Before we wrap up, just a couple more questions. So one, imposter syndrome. What are your thoughts of imposter syndrome? And do you have any recent instances where you've sort of felt like that, and how did you overcome it?
I think everyone's an imposter. And so to that end, yes, I've felt like an imposter in different circumstances. And that said, I don't know if I love the cliche of fake it till you make it. But as I grow older, I see a lot of people that have faked it to get to where they've made it. And that doesn't mean that you should be faking it until you make it. But at a minimum, for me, it's humbling to know that, again, what you said earlier, that the people that you held in such high esteem or high regard because you thought they were smarter than you, were more gifted. You thought bankers were like these crazy smart people, but like, no, they just do the same thing thousands of times over a given time period. So they're going to become really smart about one specific thing and really fast at it. That doesn't make them better, smarter. There's still other ways that you as an individual can add value outside of those specific skill sets. So in terms of being an imposter, I mean, in my current role, I have the title investor. And for me, it's humbling because I think about it more as a partner, in this case, a partner of financial resources to people who are doing the actual work, which is creating businesses that we want and need them to grow to be once in a generation type of businesses. And so that's what keeps me excited. I don't take it lightly, the work that I do. It's what makes me excited to wake up in the morning. But yeah, for the imposter, I think there's many situations where at Stanford, at Columbia, in consulting, I did a quick stint in investment banking, all those experiences, there is that little devil on the side of your shoulder saying, hey, you don't belong here. Hey, you don't deserve this. But as I've grown older and with age comes that everyone has that. And if not, the people that you might think are the most confident, you might be smarter than them, or you might have another perspective that is different and maybe in some cases better than the ones that they have. So everyone has a value to add. Hopefully you're putting yourself in situations where people are encouraging you to share that perspective. And if not, create those experiences or create those organizations because they're needed. Don't always feel like you have to follow the traditional paths. You can be an entrepreneur or an innovator. It doesn't have to always be in business. It can be in other sectors, public sector, nonprofits, etc. But everyone's an imposter is what I've come to realize.
I like that point, that lesson here, because I think if you understand that everyone has that feeling of imposter, I think it makes it less big of a deal, right? It makes it not as a bigger threat as you think. Because if you think, oh yeah, you feel I don't belong, and you feel like everyone else just have it together, like you're the only one who's feeling this, who has this feeling, everyone else is good. I think it's probably heavier on you because you think it's very peculiar, unique to you. But I think that understanding that it's not a unique thing to you, if you realize or understand that everyone goes through it at some point in some shape or form, I think it makes it easier to deal with. Like, okay, like it's fine, I can move on. Because I think the worst thing is that, you have an opportunity, whether it's to interview for a job or it's to present to your manager, present to your VP or some big opportunity. And then just because of this feeling of imposter syndrome, you let it make you shrink. Or in the case of a job, for example, it's like, all right, I'm not going to do this interview. I'm not going to do this thing or do this project because I'm feeling this kind of way. You just essentially shut yourself out from that. And the truth is, maybe other applicants or other people trying to do the same thing feeling the same way too. But the difference is they actually like went ahead and then did that project or then did that interview or then talked or spoke to their manager. So I like that lesson. I like that point here. Like, it's not something that's very unique to you. It's something that we all go through. And the difference is that we show up even when we have that feeling. And that's how you manage. That's how you still, I don't say you overcome it, but right? That's how you manage through it by still showing up. Couple of last questions here. I'm trying to see if we can try to find or get practical tips and frameworks for listeners here. So say this is one scenario. Say you are going to do a public speaking engagement or something. You're going to speak to, I don't know, a large group of people and you're starting to feel nervous about this presentation. Like, what sort of things are your go-to to try to calm you down, get past those feelings, and then still deliver on that, whatever it is, your outcome you're trying to achieve?
I mean, I think there's like on two levels. One is the physical, and then one is the actual content. I think on the physical, become very much a student of mindfulness, breathing. It's like on a very foundational level, like the breath that you take in gives you the oxygen that goes to your brain and goes to your heart and goes to your lungs, which tells it to slow down or speed up. And so on a fundamental level, just being mindful of taking this and whatnot. I think on the content side, this is where it's really leaning into finding your voice. Like, don't feel like you have to come up with some crazy new theory that no one's ever thought about before. In many cases, they don't want to hear that because if that's not authentic or genuine. And so if you can find ways to share your experience, to talk about your perspective, I think that's makes you more comfortable, and that will lead to being able to have much more of a deeper connection with whomever you're speaking in front of or talking to. And oftentimes, even as an adult, I forgot the way that it was framed or what I read, but like, people want to hear what you have to say because the way that you think everyone else thinks. And if you think that, I mean, even in a relationship, that's why communication is so important. Like, oh, this is the way that I have always thought, and this is the way that I think people act. But somebody else has a very different perspective on that. The more that you can articulate your perspective on what's driving it, that I think gives everybody else the permission to also think creatively and think about how their experiences are driving their thoughts and beliefs. And so I've really enjoyed whenever people are able to do that in a way that is authentic and is genuine, and it allows me to hear their voice as opposed to allow me to hear something that they read from somewhere else or heard from somewhere else. I think if you're able to do a combination of that mindfulness and then also being authentic, that'll really go a long way and land with your audience.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that. How can people connect with you or follow you?
My most active social media account is LinkedIn, which is not social media, obviously. but I got off the majority of the mainstream social platforms a few years ago. But I'm giving Blue Sky a try.
How's that going?
It's refreshing in these tumultuous times, but I'm not super active. So LinkedIn would probably be the best, but I'm not hard to find. If people are in the Bay Area, more than happy to grab a coffee.
I will put a link to your LinkedIn page on the show notes. So thank you again. Thank you for your time today. This has been a very insightful conversation. Thank you for sharing your journey and being so generous with your experiences. And to everyone tuning in, thank you for spending your time with us today. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to Unmuted Moments on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And please leave me a 5-star review because it really helps more people discover the show. And as always, you can reach me at unmutedmoments@gmail.com with any direct feedback or ideas. That's it for today. Thanks again for listening. I'm Ehis, and until next time, stay unmuted.